Priya Kurien, Strategy and Innovation Leader, IBM Consulting, one of IBM's leading voices in the digital transformation of the telecommunications, media and entertainment, TME industry. A telecommunications engineer by training, Priya has built her career supporting operators across 4 continents, always at the intersection of emerging technology, business strategy, and real market impact. Her work is notable for applying artificial intelligence, AI, to optimize operations, transform networks, and create personalized customer experiences. She also leads projects aimed at monetizing 5G and creating new business models enabled by advanced connectivity.
So, Priya,
Nice to meet you, Bianca.
Yes, nice to meet you as well. Thank you so much for saying yes to sitting here with me, to leaving Mobile World Congress to have a chat about some of the topics that you've spent your life and your career.
My pleasure. So thank you for having me.
So you work and you have worked. We'll start with Priya because I always start with the human sitting in front of me. And then we'll talk about the titles and what IBM is doing and all the incredible stuff that you know about telecom and AI models.
Okay.
So how did you get into this industry, Priya?
Well, I actually studied telecommunications for my university degree. So that was how I started. But I initially did start in IT itself.
Okay.
But I had always wanted to work in the telecom industry. So when I had the opportunity with my company at the time that I was working for to work with the telecom industry, I jumped at it. So been doing it for a while now. So,
and why did you know that you wanted to work in telecom?
Well, one of it was to think I had studied about things like fiber optics. It sounds like very obvious today, but this was at a time when we were talking about the ability of it to support the kind of data and communications. And so it was always of interest. Satellite communications. What's fascinating for me was learning about, telecom, wired communications and satellite being 2 different entities. But today in the world we see at MWC, it's about the congruence and confluence of satellite to support mobile networks. So it's just fascinating to observe the industry.
So you've seen that industry, you've worked for massive companies like Accenture and now like IBM.
Yeah.
And you've worked in an interesting area around business value and ROI.
Yeah.
Which is what a lot of people, when they hear buzzword bingo, AI, business transformation, it was data at one point, there was like now and cool and sexy. A lot of them don't really understand how to articulate the business value. What made you choose that part of telecom? And tell me a little bit about that area that you work in.
So as I said, I started in IT and I actually started as a database administrator.
Okay.
So if you start
before it was like actually cool to be in data.
Exactly. So the irony of it is that at the time, and I'm talking about 30 plus years ago, when networks in the office were not very stable, I would do things with the database which would cause the office network to come down, right? So
you were the person that crashed
the network. And so when everyone's computers would go blank, they'd be like, Priya, you've done it again. So you've kind of done some crazy query on the database that's kind of taken the network out. So from that standpoint, I've always had an interest in data.
Yeah.
I also love actually doing things like puzzles, finding patterns. So that's me as a person. And so when you add data and then AI is artificial intelligence, first, it started as finding patterns. So some of the earliest examples of telecom usage of AI was spotting customers who were going to churn. So that was probably something that was being used 10, 12 years ago, which is, I don't want to lose customers. They are, consumers particularly, keeping on having them churn out is not great. So can I provide some offers and, retain them?
What can I learn and look at?
Yeah. What can I offer them that they are interested in? And that's where the whole thing of looking at what they have, the data I had on them within the organization, and then what could I offer them to retain the customers. So that's where it started, telecom with traditional AI, as we call it now. It then moved into the contact centers with the chatbots. So I think all of us have experienced chatbots of different forms. But a few years ago, I was talking about an example of some best in class chatbots where, not necessarily in the telecom industry, but in retail, where I was trying to return a product that had failed. They were able to look up the data, realized I was a high value customer, and they gave me a significant discount on an upgraded product. And all of it done automatically, right? It was all done through the chatbot. So there's a level of sophistication that telecom operators have also brought into chatbots. So started as answering queries like, I'm going to travel to Germany. I want to know what my data plan is like, to answering a whole set of questions. But the early chatbots were very rigid in that you had to ask them exactly a
The right
question
prompt.
and the
Yeah.
right questions, because they only understood exactly the words that were provided. So there was a list of questions that an operator would say. If they say data plan, if they say this, if they say that, then answer this.
We all been frustrated with
Yeah,
those things
yeah,
before,
yeah.
right?
But I think the biggest and fascinating aspect that has brought generative AI to life is because of the natural language processing. Natural language processing has also been around for a while, but it's a combination of, I can just ask it in natural language and it understands because it has been trained on huge amounts of data, right? And suddenly it becomes very useful because I don't get frustrated that when I was typing in the chat conversation, I made a mistake in typing instead of PLAN, I said PLIN, and it didn't know what I was doing. So from all of
And
that
avoided
frustration,
everything, started me
yeah,
back.
and so from that to where we've gotten, it's been the last few years, the journey has been very fast, but AI has been around for 70 years. People have been looking at artificial intelligence starting with the Turing test right after the World War. So it's something where it was aspired to by researchers, but we didn't have the compute power at the time. We didn't have the huge amounts of data that we have today. And
Exactly.
so when you put data, compute power, and connectivity to get all of this together, you've got generative AI. So that's why we are where
Where we
we are
are.
today.
Okay. And now this leads you to your part of your role in IBM.
Okay.
So tell us a little bit about, we all know some of us have the blood blue. Some
Okay.
of us have spent some time learning about some things at IBM.
Yeah. So let me
What do
start
you
by
do at
talking about
IBM? And
IBM
which part
because
of this
so
big?
IBM has been around for 110 plus years. It's one of the iconic technology companies where people, when they talk about mainframes, my first technology company that I knew ever was IBM. It's 3 letters, it's easy. But today I'm part of the thought leadership division, which is
Okay.
known as the Institute for Business Value. So it's called the IBM IBV.
Okay.
And the IBV is ranked among the top 3 globally across industry in terms of our thought leadership. And this
And you're
is
hearing her here next to me. How lucky. Go.
this is about cross industry reports for business execs who are trying to understand their priorities, challenges,
Hmm.
opportunities, but it's talking about the business value of technology. So, one of our very successful reports in 2024 was about the CEO's Guide to Generative AI. So,
Okay.
really breaking it down to what do you need to do, what do you need to know, and how do you execute on it. So not trying to get into RAG and prompt and all of these things that will probably get the CEO to say,
I am lost. I have one too many things to do, a
so
board
what
and a
do I need to
regulator
do?
on me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so very simple language for the exec, not in technical terms, but with very specific actions on what you need to do. So if you've got such a powerful technology, for instance, one of the things we talk about is the importance of governance. You want to govern it because you
Mhm.
don't want such a powerful technology to be outside of your control, because as CEO, you are still responsible for what happens. So,
Of course.
so it's starting with some might see it as very simple, but I think sometimes, as I say, common sense is not as common as people might assume it to
Yeah.
be, right? So that's part of what we do. So I'm one of the research leaders in the IBV. And so in my role, I right now work across industry and technology. But till about 6 months ago, I was the telecom industry leader. And in my role, and also in my other professional capacities, I have been working with AI and especially IBM's Watson X for the last several years. I'm part of the UK's Telecom Innovation Network, which is where the UK government is looking to try and make the telecom industry something that really thrives and succeeds. And the role, I'm part of the AI expert working group. So with the data background I've had, been doing AI, as you said, Accenture to now at IBM, it's been an interesting journey.
That is an incredible journey and not an easy one. I want to double down on a couple things that you shared.
Mhm.
One is, I don't know about you guys, but like I need access. We will put it on the show notes, the access to this report. I know if my fair share of CEOs and board members who could use a practical way
Okay,
of what is the business
sure.
value
Yeah,
and the actual ROI
yeah.
for
So,
AI.
yes.
So give us a little preview about, I've been talking about understanding we had this whole transition with huge consulting companies telling everybody a little bit about my precious data.
Hmm.
It's mine, hoarded.
Hmm.
These people ended up with like swamps, not lakes.
Hmm.
And we all know that the basis for either a good prompt or a model is what kind of data you have, what kind of stewardship you have, what ethical
Sure.
responsibility you have. And it cannot be garbage in, otherwise it's going to be garbage
Garbage
out,
out.
just like that
Yeah,
kind of frustrating experience we've all had with
yeah.
a bad bot. What's the reality today when you were doing this practical guide to CEOs? Like, give us a rundown of what's really happening.
So, one of the things that I wanted to actually differentiate on is traditional versus generative AI. So,
So break it down for people that
yeah.
don't understand, because I think a lot of
So
people
in
pretend to know.
traditional AI, this was where the algorithms were set up. You
Mhm.
had machines learn to do something. Let's say, pick out customer churn. Let me go back to that example. Picking out customer churn, right? Um, it was so reliant on the algorithms staying within certain statistical parameters. The moment they moved out on either the top or the bottom end, you'd get some crazy results. So this is why I have spoken to, C-suite who say, oh, it started out great, but then it started giving me garbage responses. But
Yeah.
that was because they didn't continue to manage and maintain the algorithms and tune it as more and more data came out. So that same response that you had, which is garbage, not necessarily garbage in, but if something's skewing. So take another,
Unstructured or
no, not
anything, or
necessarily
new data.
unstructured. Let's say that a whole set of women in
Okay.
red clothes
Okay.
chose to, buy a particular type of scarf, right?
Okay.
The algorithm could end up concluding that women who wear red skirts like that scarf. The reality was potentially that it was an airline who had a red uniform and they needed their flight attendants to wear a particular scarf.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't like the whole
Universe of women.
universe of women who like color want to wear that particular scarf. So
It
that's
sounds
an
like the world has
example.
been listening to this traditional AI model mostly.
Yeah. So, but with generative AI, one of the powers of it is that it teaches itself. So it learns from data that it goes through. So, as you rightly have also said, it depends on what data it's been trained on. But let's take some easy examples like I have a network equipment, I run a network and there's a whole lot of vendor manuals that go into, version one of product one, version 10 of product X, and a whole set of manuals. Now, when I have to debug the network, I have to actually look up various manuals, figure out, oh, it was that version one and I need to do this. the power of generative AI, for instance, in the network, is being an assistant to the network engineer, where it's been trained on those vendor manuals, right? It's able to look up all those service tickets where in the past there's been a similar problem, and it can come back and say, based on these types of tickets and these manuals and whatever knowledge base that I've looked at, I think this might be the problem. And then the engineer can take a look and think about it to see whether that would make sense. The engineer in the past was spending a lot of time having to just do all of that reading and then, look at all the various tickets. Is there a history, or you're writing queries? And I completely get what you're saying about data swamps, because I've set up data warehouses where, yes, it did become an utter swamp. But here, because it's training itself, it's able to pick up and then give you these ideas. Of course, you can then tune the responses based on your particular context, your particular domain, and that's how you give it power. But it is, I think, one of the most powerful technologies that we have seen, because it can be applied to a whole variety. And we've seen with the large language models that have been deployed, it can help you plan a trip to maybe Portugal, but it can also tell you about the rules of sport, or, some medical health condition. That's what a large language model does, because it's been trained on a whole variety of things. So I don't know whether that's helped answer your question, but
Totally.
that's
I think it's helped. It's great. I've been collecting through Mobile World Congress different ways that people described traditional generative, or people talk about neural networks or language models, big or small, and the differences between them. We're trying to help break down what does all this technology mean,
okay.
and how does technology not only go for good, but as you said, for business value.
So from a business value standpoint, the value of this technology is the way it can simplify and make efficient some of the more mundane tasks. As a network engineer, the killjoy of having to go through all the different tickets, keep in my head or make a note and say, okay, that ticket we did this ticket we did that, go through manuals. If I have the ability to have a summarization where it says, I think this might be the problem, and therefore this is how you do the fix, I can use my expertise to figure out whether that makes sense or not. If it does, then I apply that. As we get more comfortable with applying what is being recommended by the AI engine, there's the potential to get into what everyone has been talking about at MWC. I know, agentic AI, where you then get AI engines to execute, on recommendations. But to try and keep it at a level that is simple and not get too technical, let's stay with the fact that the value of this is in being able to not just be used for efficiency, which is where a lot of people have started, but you really have to reimagine a world with this technology. And I think organizations and people have not yet wrapped their head around
The art of the
the
possible.
art of the possible. But when you take a look at when 4G came in, right? The Ubers of the world, the Deliveroos, all of them came in. That was because they reimagined a world of what we would want, right?
They looked at the pieces, I
Yeah.
think, and said, hey,
And
what's
so,
possible?
yeah. So Dean Carman said, every once in a while, new technology, old problem, and some great innovation
Some
happens.
bold
So,
humans, I find that is the part of
so
that quote that is missing.
that's what you need coming out,
Yeah.
right? So that is, I think, comes from having partners, multidisciplinary teams working together. This is not a tech solution. You do need the business. You need people who are maybe completely unrelated. So, for instance, if you're trying to solve something here, bringing in the support team to say, how may we do this differently, right? And reimagining is something where you then incorporate AI as part of the solution. I think right now, most people are still just getting out of the experiment phase.
Okay.
They're still trying to grapple with how do they scale this. Our view is, and we've heard this plenty from customers, As they've tried to scale, particularly if it was a very large language model, they find that the cost of inferencing, which is when the model runs,
Yeah.
is very expensive.
Okay.
So it's like when the cloud first came in, everyone thought, oh, it's like point not 1p to do something.
Yeah.
And then um, I think 7, 8 years ago, I was doing engagements for clients where we were trying to figure out why their cloud bill was so expensive, right? So somehow, while it's meant to be point not 1, you end up with a mega bill. So similarly, when it comes to things like with AI, right? A large model ends up costing you a lot. And if you've got, I don't know, millions of customers and you're using it, it just scales up. So, this is why, from an IBM standpoint, we believe that models need to be small and efficient and suited for the job. And we are also great believers in an open source and therefore open models, which means that you can see how it's been trained, how it works. And it's like the days of Linux. So there's a whole world that thinks, oh, if I open up and it's not closed and proprietary, then it's going to be less secure. Actually, the opposite, because you've got a very active community that wants to, support, make sure that it's secure, make sure that it evolves, and that's how it goes forward. So that's our view, which is both small language and open source.
I tend to talk about this a lot when it comes to the mindset shift
Mhm.
that I think data brings us. As the largest asset class humanity has ever built, we look and think about this still in a zero-sum game, like you said.
Yeah.
A world where, it's about abundance, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about this infinite possibility of like, why are we just so obsessed about sending people to Mars when there's so much incredible things we can do if we learn how to listen?
Yeah.
And I think when I look at data telling stories and data connecting points that were just maybe not humanly possible,
Mhm.
timingly possible, as we look at, today's understanding of physics compared to Einstein's understanding,
Mhm.
and the list goes on into
Yeah.
anecdotes that the average person can
Yeah.
grasp. Businesses are afraid, and you said something, 2 points that I want to go back to that I think IBM is
Yeah.
known for. One
Yeah.
is security.
Yep.
And this idea, this is what happens. We live life in the fast lane over here. Security, opening. Opening is something, again, mindset
Yeah.
shift of zero sum. Now I have
Yeah.
more. And this notion that with the zero trust architecture and everything that it can control.
Yeah.
I thought humans would have learned when we got sent during the COVID-19 pandemic to our rooms that
Mm.
we're kind of connected as a species, but we did
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
So maybe data will teach us that now that we're all kind of endlessly scrolling. When this happens, you think that business leaders need to understand once and for all that this openness means more services, more security, that this gives them a fair chance to fight fraud or other things that now have also the power of robots that don't follow compliance rules, that don't do POCs, and don't ask you what their return on investment is. They just try, right? so,
That's
so
true.
talk
So,
to me about this. Like, I think people are afraid. They understand, but they're afraid, and being afraid makes the news, unfortunately.
yeah.
So how for business leaders out there that, we've had CISOs here, we had ministers sitting here in this car, and a lot of them talk about openness, talk about collaboration, but we know that the difficulties is in the execution.
Yeah.
In the, I'm now going to open my APIs, or I'm
Yeah.
now going to have a data model where somebody else is going to have my data. As you were in an industry that not so known for being open.
Fair enough.
But
Yeah,
changing.
it's changing.
And as you said, shifting as these walls no longer exist as we move data around.
Yeah. So to respond to that, a couple of things. Red Hat is an IBM subsidiary, and
Yes.
Red
We
Hat
watched
is
that
very
acquisition closely.
successful in the telecom industry.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you might find interesting is when it has come to the cloudification of the network, actually you've had telecom CTOs being quite open to having Red Hat Red Hat OpenShift, Red Hat as a fundamental part of the network, right? So I will cite that as an example for this industry opening up. The second thing that you said, which is a really interesting perspective and really important, with us interconnecting data and interconnecting systems, with that comes great responsibility of securing the
Absolutely.
data. And therefore, one of the other trends that we see, and we've had another report which we did with Palo Alto that came out just a few weeks ago, is about people moving to a platform for security so that it can support the data, help execute the AI strategies that people have. So there
Okay.
are a couple of things that, as there's transformation, as there's opening up, as there's adoption of AI, one is the governance and two is the security. I think without these two, it would be very concerning to hear of operators going or stepping into it. It's perfectly fine to do a few pilots and things like that, but when you're scaling up, these are two elements. And you are absolutely right that security is important when we open up. Yes, you have a lot of people looking at it, interested, and are able to support, because I certainly believe that large team can give you a lot of inputs. You need to know how to get it and how to manage it, but absolutely, that's one of the ways that we progress, right?
Yeah.
The examples come from fields like medicine, where they've had multidisciplinary teams to, treat things like cancer, where they bring the radiologist, the consultant, the nurse maybe in charge, bring them all together and say, so how may we look after a patient? Some of those lessons of that multidisciplinary team come into places like this in AI and
And
technology and responsibility to support.
And certainly one that needs to. I don't know about any of you, but I've certainly, unfortunately, spent a little bit of time in hospital in my lifetime. And I joke with doctors, I'm like, which piece of me are we talking about today? Because, this notion that we're
Yeah,
disconnected, whether it happens in our healthcare
yeah.
system. But we talked about a lot of leaders in the broadband space. Like we've seen this happen in France now with EMS services.
Hmm.
We've seen this happen with BT and some other folks in the telecommunication industry
Hmm.
operating in other countries,
Hmm.
setting up treaties to say, how do I secure communication? And we've seen this happening with live streaming and other forms of data
Hmm.
being passed through the network.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that IBM is seeing the business value come to businesses? Because I see this as an opportunity. It's an opportunity for them to see why they open APIs, why these things exist.
Yeah. I think when you would talked about this, why open APIs, why these things exist, it's because a hypothesis that we talked about a few months ago is that this kind of innovation and transformation is going to come cross industry, right? So
Absolutely.
therefore, you do need to open up and help others work with it. APIs is a great way so you can actually share what you want to share rather than maybe everything that you have if you don't want to. So that becomes a very important aspect. The other thing is that when you have partners or you're working with others to try and innovate, the challenge is not in when things are going great. It's like relationships. The challenge is how you navigate your differences. And I think that's a very important aspect. So when you have a good partnership, and we've worked several partnerships, tons of them actually, you have the first kind of phase where, everything seems great. You've signed off on a partnership, yay. And then you hit some roadblocks, you hit some problems with clients. But do you actually spend time to not get into a blame game, but do you actually spend time to say, how could we do this better? And it's always keeping that positive, removing the negative perspective, removing the view of blaming someone else. Oh, that partner did this, and that's why we are here. That won't get you anywhere, because then people won't want to work with you, and innovation is happening, right? So I was at CES in January, and you see all kinds of incredible things happening there. So Qualcomm and JP Morgan coming together in a connected car to do a biometric verification so that you can drive through and pay. But that's coming from verifying you, and this is another example of two different partners coming together in a third industry to achieve outcomes. We need to think that way, I think, about the art of the possible.
I love that art of the possible. And you touched on one of my favorite topics. I've spent 15 years of my life in identity.
Okay.
And the idea of being able to inherently be yourself
Mm-hmm.
and navigate through this world of security where the digital boundaries of services no longer formal the sovereignty lines
Mm-hmm.
that we once drew in the sand.
Yeah.
Right. And I think large corporations are struggling to understand how they put a lot of this to practice. Talk to me a little bit more about what you came here to see at Mobile World Congress and what were you excited to share?
So I think at Mobile World Congress, one of the interesting things was to see how people are progressing on things such as the Telco AI Alliance was very exciting last year. So a year down, where have they got to, right?
Where did
And I
they get
think,
to?
and so one of the interesting bits of feedback that they had was that last year when they came together, they thought that, they were going to create new revenue generating services. And they suddenly realized this as an AI alliance, when they come together, different telecom operators, they hit roadblocks on revenue generation as competition, and then there was a problem. So they pivoted and started looking at efficiency gains. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. So, there's learnings and there are experiences to share and then take forward. We see to some extent a lot of AI related conversations. I've had a few folks say to me, everywhere is AI today.
I
But
know.
but sometimes these kind of conferences are all about trying to push you to imagine the art of the possible. It doesn't necessarily mean that everyone has implemented AI, but they're trying to learn something from it, right? So that's one of the other interesting factors that comes out. We've had a whole set of interesting conversations at our booth about, what are the new business models that operators need to consider and find. What are some of the findings from our latest telecom report, which was about the impact of the cloud and AI on the network? And one of the things that did come out of that was how serious security needs to be. Because we did find in that report that these kind of security audits are being done maybe twice a year. That's not good enough in today's changing environment. So the cost of a security breach is significantly higher. And there are lessons to be taken away about, in a changing world, how you need to be securing all the time, not just trying it out, a few times a year. So
And that
there's,
changes everything, right? Like that was one of my most favorite parts because I think it kind of goes with a lot of statements. Obviously, we've seen the CEO of Microsoft say this around, the changing model of SaaS being dead and the way you're going to consume security services or any sort of technology services
yeah,
is going to change. And I think it derives from that. It derives from an understanding about,
yeah,
you talked about it, your resilience and your care and your guardianship of your data,
yeah,
what you're going to hold, the speed in which that's being created, consumed,
yeah,
contained, analyzed, used to create
yeah,
services is just
yeah,
exponential.
absolutely.
So everything that comes with that. And when you hear this knowledge about efficiency, unfortunately, versus revenue sharing, do you think this is just the beginning of them really realizing what the potential is? Maybe by saying, okay, let's share our cost efficiencies and find out the safe way or
Who
the
knows?
safer way.
Well, I think the challenge when multiple people from the same industry come together is that if they do things around revenue too much, you're going to say that there's something else happening there. So they do need to be very cautious because telecom is a regulated industry. So they have been thoughtful and considered that they may not be able to do it that way. But this is where I say take other examples where you have cross industry collaboration that comes in. Then the art of the possible on revenues. I think a great example for me is when you take a look at Uber and the traditional black cab in London.
Mm-hmm.
When Uber came into London, there was tremendous resistance from the black cabs.
Yep.
Today, you can book a black cab on an Uber app.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that's a way where the traditional urban mobility and the digital mobility have come together, but it's reimagined the art of the possible, right? So here are ways where you could end up with co-opetition uh, achieving some results. But equally, in a regulated market, there needs to be care and consideration of what you do together. And, could that be taken in a different way, right? You might have best intentions, but that may not be how it's interpreted.
And I think that that's a huge, great conversation that we're going to have, and we're having more with regulators. Like, when the art of what is value
Mhm.
and how do you regulate value? When we start
Yeah,
to blur these lines, which we have already with the
yeah,
fintech space, we have already with the tokenized
yeah,
asset space, it's going to get more and more
yeah,
hard to say
yeah,
who plays in which sandbox.
yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
this is another opportunity that data
Yeah,
brings
yeah,
with
it
us
does.
saying, okay, how do we create this safely?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about a little bit of your crystal ball. I know you're head of research. What's the next thing that people are looking at when you're looking at these? We're still at the infancy stages of implementation. We're still not, fully revenue generating and believing in it.
And I think one of the very interesting places, again, where IBM plays is in the quantum computing space, right?
We're going to have
So
some
the
quantum computing
combination
ones.
of classical computing plus quantum is really going to reimagine a lot of the industries, because then things like healthcare, right? The time it takes to find a new drug, find a cure for a disease, potentially can be turned on its head. So I think that's definitely a space to watch. There's definitely a space where AI kind of gets pervasive within organizations. And tomorrow I'm speaking at MWC about, the future of skills in a world of AI. And I think it's a
Was going to be my
super
last question. So if you
complex
haven't seen her,
question.
we'll make sure we put some clicks and some links for the guys that have missed it. But yes,
So
give us a
I think,
spoiler about what you're going to be
well,
saying
well,
before I let you
the
go.
the debate is about, is it delegation or is it abdication if you don't think for yourself. So there's an article which is the basis for the debate, which is to say critical thinking is going out the window with AI doing everything. My response to that is to say that before the printing press was invented, right, people used to painfully write by hand any books.
Mhm.
The printing press scaled it up, and then knowledge spread in a way that would not have been possible if we were handwriting books. So I think we shouldn't be looking only at things like critical thinking is going to go out the window. Humans are tremendously adaptable, and I think that's one of the joys of us as human beings. We will adapt around this, right? And so I'm looking forward to it. I think there are certain skill sets like critical thinking still that are important, curiosity, and just the willingness to learn.
Yeah.
And I think everyone's going to be good.
I'm excited to hear your talk, but I tend to say, like, I couldn't agree with you more. I often tell people, either through my work with UNESCO or just my curiosity in AI, that it's like, why are we asking this question that sounds like the doomsday about
Yeah,
what's going to happen when
yeah,
we're all out of jobs?
yeah,
What if the world could look like, imagine, I don't know, were we supposed to work 12, 16, 20 hours in some countries? Was that meant to be what technology? What if all this was meant to
yeah,
set us free and change the way we
yeah.
look and take care of
So
our
maybe
planet
we
and
will do a
people?
lot more
I
creative
hope.
things and
Yeah. Well,
creative
I hope
thinking.
if
So,
nothing else, we get creative about how we fix the planet and respect for each other. So if data can help us find a way to do that while keeping us secure
yeah,
digitally, I think that's a really interesting thing. For those people interested out there, thank you so much. This was Priya, and we will make sure that we share her report and her team's report and work on how to make sense of AI. What is the
thank
business value?
thank you
And
so
hopefully how
much,
to do this
Bianca.
for good.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your curiosity and investing your life in helping us think about this critically. It's been a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you.